Hi there. Welcome to the Growth Whisperers, where everything we talk about is building enduring great companies. My name is Brad Giles, and today, as always, joined by my co-host, Kevin Lawrence from Vancouver, Canada. G'day, Kevin. How are things today for you?
Awesome. Yeah, it's night. It's getting a little dark here, but as always, things are going well. Just starting to see people get fired up into the fall season, as we call it here, and there's lots happening. Lots more people coming out of summer mode and looking for some help to sharpen up their companies as we go into the end of the year and the beginning of the new year. So yeah, anyway, it's all good.
Very good. Very good. I'm well too. So let's jump right into it. What is your word or thought of the day? What might be on your mind today? As you think about that, this is something that we encourage all teams to start a meeting with. Just something to shake it off, get ready, get started. Okay, if you want to think about it there.
I think it's the value in being a jerk.
That's not what I thought you were going to say.
It's like there's a time and place for it. I'm listening to this audiobook right now, Anthony Bourdain. It's called Medium Raw. I believe it's the last book he wrote. And he's a very well-known chef, wrote a book called Kitchen Confidential, kind of very critical, almost like a critic of the chefs. And not a food critic so much, but a critic of the industry and people. But he traveled around the world trying amazing foods, and unfortunately he ended up taking his life. And in the book he talks about his struggles with mental health and things like that. But there was times in the book where he was known to be a bit of a jerk in many different ways. And I think in many ways he could be a good guy and he could be a jerk. But it really made me think there's times when you really need to be strong and almost put your foot down, and not endorsing being a jerk per se, but there's times where you need to be strong, and just some things just need to be said. And he had a whole diatribe about how there were some major things wrong in the food business, particularly in some parts of protein processing. I'll save it for those who want to read the book. But it's like some things are just wrong. It's not right. And sometimes you got to be a jerk about it to kind of get some attention on it and get some energy behind it. So I might change that to maybe sometimes it's important to really be, take a stand and be direct rather than jerk. I just thought about jerk when I'm thinking about him, but we'll keep it as sometimes it's good to be a jerk.
Okay. So for me, I got to see Jim Collins speak a few weeks ago, and it was as always really good. But one of the things that he said that really struck me was about COVID. And he said that COVID is quite possibly the largest return on luck event that's going to happen in our lives. So how have you capitalized on that event?
Yeah.
He said it's, so he, just for context, he says that luck is a real thing, and great companies capitalize on luck. When they get a luck event, they make the most of it. And
yes,
so,
and in his research, he said it's not that they actually have better luck. No. There's good luck and bad luck. They just know how to capitalize on a luck event that sometimes can swing either way.
Yeah. And so it just was a perspective that I'd never thought of, which is, COVID is a massive luck event. And what are you doing to capitalize on that event? Anyway, so I'm entertained.
It's interesting as you say that, Brad, because I know during COVID, our firm doubled basically doubled in size.
Yeah.
And I know of other boutique consulting firms, I know one that collapsed dramatically because they played the cards differently. They read it and played it differently. We had a dramatically different approach than they did. And we had a conversation, as COVID was, 3/4 of the way through. And I shared with them things. They're like, what? Huh? Because they were expecting me to say that our business was down, and it was far from that.
And do you know what is funny? Drawing on what you just said, he also said that there are people throughout the pandemic who doubled down. They were like, well, this is a whole new situation. We've got to work really, really hard and get into it and get stuff done. And they were like, they worked harder than they've ever worked.
Yep.
And then the opposite, there were people who were like, oh, I got to catch up on my Netflix. I got to, and they were essentially
I
bored.
don't know those people. I don't know those people.
No, nor do I. But his point was find the people who worked the hardest and really dug down and single them out and promote them. Like, these are the future leaders of your business. And I thought that was really good as well.
That's a brilliant line.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
because they're the ones that are taking responsibility in critical
Yes.
situations.
They're the people who step up in tough times. Those are the ones you want to go to war with. And it was kind of like the war of COVID. Hopefully that war is over.
Indeed.
Awesome. So in today's show, we're talking about how to deal with an underperforming executive. Now, it could be an executive or a senior leader or anyone, but we're looking at, more in the boardroom. And kind of the key thing here is that these executives are critical roles in our company. They set the tone for a lot of things and making sure things get done. And weak executives generally create weak or weak performing teams, which starts to rot their company from the inside out. It all starts to fall apart. And even though it's one part of the division, that can get really weak and it can suck the whole company down.
So let's just frame it this way. Sorry, Kev. So
No.
maybe you would like to go out and have a beer with them or have dinner with them. Like,
yeah,
you'd love to hang out with them.
I got a list of those ones. People I'd love to go for a beer. I just wouldn't want to have them working in any of my clients.
Yeah. And like, you like their company and they're good to hang around. But each time you get the data, like, they're just not consistently creating the numbers that they need to. And it's this horrible feeling that you get. It's like, why can't I just get them to do what it says on the job scorecard?
Why don't they just do their job?
Why don't they just do their job? Like, they seem like a good person. So this is what we might call B players.
Yeah, you love them. They fit the culture, but they consistently don't perform that well. You need to step down a little bit out of your role to manage them, follow up with them, support them. They are just not an incredible performer that you can always count on, but they're really nice and they're trusted, and that's why we often hang on to them. There's two categories of underperformers companies normally hang on to. B players, we love them and we're loyal to them, but they're mediocre. The other category is toxic A players. They're high performing, but they are jerks, taking into account the word I used up front. And so these B players can clog up a system because they generally don't help to create amazing outcomes in the business, even though we like them and love them. And in the years of doing this, those are the hardest ones. We've had to let many of them go.
Yeah.
And we've also had to demote a bunch of them and give them notably less responsibility, which can be a great solution. It's just really hard to deal with. And generally, most of the CEOs we work with, they normally, up until we come along, just kind of let it roll. Like, there's bigger fish to fry in their mind. And unfortunately, it creates a lot of secondary and third tier issues.
Because we have a responsibility to create the results. And we have a duty as leadership positions to help people to get the results. But some people, I don't know, they're either not going to get there or they're slow to get there. It takes them too much time to get there.
And maybe there's a lot of other factors. They could be in the wrong job. They could have the wrong manager. They might not even know. So we'll dig into some of that and share some good examples. But to start with, we got other episodes that you can listen to that would relate to some of these principles. Number 71 is about how to use SMART goals with your team to have, clear accountability. 72 and 73 about how the best leaders create team accountability. So setting up accountability, and we'll touch on some highlights from that today. And then 123, 7 valuable ways to help develop middle managers, because there's many different versions of what could fix this. Also, in my book, Your Oxygen Mask First, chapter 10, Make Yourself Useless, which is about building a strong team that delivers better results than you do without you. And Brad, in your book, you've also got a chapter on this as well.
So it's about the 5 roles of a CEO called Made to Thrive. And the first chapter is there is accountability for all employees and suppliers, and the 5 things that you need to do to ensure that you can get that. So there's some good resources there. Maybe I'd like to start off with an example. As a sales manager, I started working with a team, and the sales manager had a sales team, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 people in the sales team. And it was a lovely guy, quite entertaining, as salespeople often are, which is a great trait. I love it. But, he just didn't drive the results. So he had a part-time, he was kind of, I guess, late 40s, early 50s, and he had a part-time hobby, which was real estate. So a lot of his energy would go into his real estate portfolio. Now, it was, he wasn't he didn't have hundreds of properties, but, I think he had a few, and they kept him busy. And that was really where his passion lied.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes we would be wondering, where is he? Or certainly the CEO would tell me that they were wondering, like, he popped out and then he had to go and, fix a leaking tap, or there was something else that he'd find out about. But he's really, he's got this team of salespeople who could be great, and they weren't. And so we had several conversations about that, and we continued to drive the accountability that we need. And this person, I don't know if he couldn't or didn't want to, but the elephant in the room was really that this person had a real estate hobby that was their passion, and they didn't really want to be part of a scaling company. They wanted to be just in a job that would pay enough that they could do the other things. Subsequently, we increased the accountability over time across the whole business. He didn't love that. He ended up resigning. And then we brought in an amazing A player. And subsequently, we saw the revenues in the business. Yeah, look, it took 6 months or something, but they really took off. They really took off.
So in that case, when you actually created the accountability that probably should have been there in the first place, you said, I'm not really signed up to do this full-time job thing with all these accountabilities, so I'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I've had lots. I had a similar one with a sales manager, a different scenario. But this sales manager was dramatically underperforming. The CEO wanted to fire him. From everything I heard about the guy, it was like, what are we doing? One of my team went in and did a bit of an assessment with this gentleman, the head of sales it was, and started coaching him because we wanted to try and give him a chance. They were loyal to him. He had some shares in the company, and it was, well, what my team member found is the person actually didn't know how to be a sales manager. He got given the job because he had the gift of the gab. He was a technician. And then he was running a sales team. So he wasn't, I don't think, working as hard as he could have, but he actually did not know what to do at all. There was no structure, no accountability, and no even system for him to run. He was lost, just purely lost. So the member of my team got in there, started getting him to have plans, goals, thinking about the team, thinking about visiting customers, etc. All of a sudden, his performance started to get better and better and better. So it was tightening up the accountability, but it was also, in this case, he needed help. He needed capability to be able to do it. So that was a different, but as a success story. And another similar one, we had a head of the finance function in a company that I work with, and the person in the role was awesome, like great to chat with, personable, but they were consistently failing on what they were doing. So, and when we do strat planning sessions, we break out the KPIs and the goals by executive. And they came to a meeting and everything was red. A second meeting in a row, everything was red. And we happened to do a 360 at that time too. And then the CEO was able to have a conversation. And I was prodding a little bit and saying, look, we think you're awesome. we really do want you on the team, but you can see based on the results in the meeting, this isn't going to work. So you have a choice that you can step up, and I want you to, or I'm going to have to make a change because I can't, like, the stuff's got to get done.
Yeah.
And from everything I knew in that situation, if I had to, make my best guess would be they wouldn't have made it. That person stepped up and is an A player these days. They might have days where they're an A minus, but they've done an incredible job. But because the system was so clear, and the CEO had the real conversation with them, and they found a way to pull up their socks, like, and it was absolutely inspiring and absolutely just freaking awesome.
So many. Did you want to close that? Anything else there?
I got another example, but you go ahead.
Yeah. So many times people get promoted because they're a good technician, as you kind of indicated there. And technician could be in any role, right? They're doing a good job. They get a promotion, but do they really want to do that new job? Sure, give me the higher pay, but do they really want to do that new job and take the responsibility often for holding other people who used to be their teammates accountable? And sometimes that can be a bit of a problem. I think about one team that I work with. We've got a person was kind of promoted from supervisor to manager, lovely guy, just, the kind of guy, again, that you'd love to go and have a beer with. And he was a great participant in our leadership team workshops, but he went through a journey where he realized he just didn't want to do the job. And I tell you what, I was so proud of this guy because he took it in such a humble, he didn't take it. No, he came to the conclusion, and I stress tested it with him. And I was like, look, are you sure? Because that this pay rate is different to that pay rate. Are you sure? And he kind of said, I know what that other job delivers, and I don't want to do that other job, like the higher, the senior role. I want to stick at the supervisor level. It's what I do. I haven't been able to make those numbers. So that was I think an unusual and fortunate circumstance that was probably mostly to do with that company's strong culture. But so often it's hard. We get an executive that isn't making the numbers, and they use their friendship, their personality, everything to just continue to do that. Yeah.
So the last one I'll share was one in the Middle East I worked with, where it was a director, or a VP, I think, under an SVP, but the second level of leadership. And I'd worked with this guy for about a decade. I knew this guy very well, liked him, and I knew he had challenges. But there was a new leader running that division, and the new leader, after a year or so, wanted to get rid of the guy and said, "This guy's no good. He's got to go." And I'm like, this is a company that's loyal to people, always wants to make sure people are treated right. But it kind of came not out of the blue, but the leader was so strong and passionate about firing this person very quickly. It just didn't feel right. And when I asked him what the issues were, and he explained them, and I was kind of an advocate for doing the right things in that company. So long story short, when I asked the executive to explain it, it wasn't clear. I had a meeting because of something else. I had a meeting with that person and the executive, and I had the executive articulate what needed to happen, and he wasn't clear at all. I asked the executive to write out what needed to happen, and he wasn't clear. Long story short, even though it looked, the executive made a clear case, I wasn't convinced because there was some history there. But what I ended up needing to do, because the executive couldn't make a clear case of what the person had to do, he was just more frustrated. And so I had the executive make a list of 5 specific things that this guy needed to do to keep his job. The 3 of us had a meeting, the truth is, we had questions about the executive at this point. We weren't even sure about him. That's why I was involved. So the executive and his employee,
Yeah.
and because the executive was new, we were still checking out. Long story short, we made the list. All three of us aligned around the list, and I said to the director, "Hey, you're crystal clear on what you got to do. Great." So when I was back there the next quarter, because I went every quarter to meet with them, for other things, I just had a quick meeting with these guys. I said, "Okay, let's talk about how we did." And we went through the list, and the director had achieved about 40 or 50% of things on the list. And I said to the director, "Well, you put your executive in a very tough position here. You were given a chance and clearly told what you needed to do, and you didn't do it.
Yeah.
So this is between the two of you." But I said, "Was this crystal clear?" "Yes." "Did you have the resources?" "Yes." I said, "What happened?" And then he sort of, made up a story. But the thing is, it was so darn clear that he basically fired himself.
And that's
He
what
was
you
given.
want.
It is, and it's as fair and humane as possible. It bothers me greatly if people get fired out of the blue. Now, there's certain things that it might need to be, but if you haven't articulated the situation and giving people chances, it's like they should fire themselves, even though they'll still react and be shocked or whatever. But they should be firing themselves because they choose not to do what needs to get done in that job.
But I'm going to raise a big red flag at this point, because and this is to do with something that we've spoken about a few times recently, which is the window versus the mirror. All of the examples that we've provided have been looking out the window rather than in the mirror. And so what that means is looking out the window is Jim Collins' phrase, which means when something happens, we look out the window to blame other people, rather than looking in the mirror and saying, okay, what have I done to create this underperforming situation?
Yep.
I've got a case that occurred recently where we'd launched in another country. We'd sent a senior executive over to that other country, and they were underperforming. And I took a call with the CEO, and they were like, look, I think that I need to, should I bring this person back to Australia and recalibrate them, get them in a different position so that we can kind of start from scratch? And I was like, okay, if we do that, there's a pretty good chance they're going to quit. I know this person is a high performer. And I said, well, before we do that, let's just explore a completely alternate opportunity, which is looking in the mirror. And so how clearly have you communicated this problem to this individual? And he said, well, look, we haven't probably had a one-on-one for 3 months. And I was away, and the other person was away, not Brad, but the CEO was away.
Yeah.
The other person was away. We just really haven't connected. Okay. And then we went into...
And that often happens also in situations where they don't want to have to talk about the stuff. They avoid talking to each other. Whether that's what happened in that case, it becomes like, I don't want to have to talk to them. I don't want to have to deal with them. I'll just avoid them.
Yeah, that was starting to happen.
It's a bad sign.
And I was like, okay, so that's one thing. Do they understand? Are they given the support, or have they been sent to this new country where to start up a new office and they don't feel like they've got the support from you or the executive team? Do they feel like they're an island or part of our culture? Long story short, we went through that, and he was like, oh my God, I've been looking at this the complete wrong way.
Wow, that's awesome.
And I said, metaphorically, why don't you put your arm around this individual, okay, and say, look, I think that we've really let you down about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all of these items. And we actually, that worked, turned that situation around. And the point was that this person their numbers weren't there. Okay. But there was things that were structurally occurring that was meaning that this person thought, I'm not part of the executive team. They don't value me, and they're kind of stepping out. So it's just a red flag. Don't say how to deal with an executive that's underperforming and only look out the window. Also look in the mirror.
That's good, because if they're not performing, and that's why I think it's our job, because have we made ourselves clear? Most of it, what I say is we need to isolate ourselves as the variable that is the problem, right? They basically remove ourselves from the equation, because often the manager doesn't do enough because they're fed up and they've almost resigned to the fact that they're not going to make it in their mind, and that's not fair. So there's a few basics that we always make sure, and you pick them up in the stories. One, are there crystal clear expectations that get reported on regularly, ideally at least monthly for all of them, for sure quarterly. And that's, there's financial targets they have to hit for their team. There's KPIs that tell the health of their operations. And then there's goals or rocks or priorities, whatever you call them, that they need to achieve. But those three specific accountabilities are there on a regular basis being reviewed. Now, the goals got to be smart. They got to be aligned to the strategy. They got to be smart so you can measure it and tell if people are performing, and they can tell if they're performing. And I think the ideal is they should be able to self-manage because their objectives are so clear. In most companies, it's as clear as mud. So the managers often, and again, when we go into companies, one of the first things we do is get goals for everybody in the room, because then we can start to see who's who in the zoo. Because I've been conned by charming people in those rooms before. Remember a guy that was head of marketing, the most loved guy in the whole company by everyone. He didn't get anything done. The man, could he tell a story, and he was great to go for beers with. But, once we started having clear accountabilities, it was clear. And he ended up having to get fired because he couldn't get things done. So basically, the basics, clear accountabilities, goes back to the book, The 1 Minute Manager.
Yeah.
Make sure the goals are clear. And if they don't achieve their goals, go back and double check they're clear. And if they were, then go back and give feedback and get them to reset it and try again.
Yeah.
The monthly reporting I talked about. And then you got to take time to think about this yourself. Like like you talked about, Brad, and you got to think, what is my role in this? What could I do? How could I support them better? And at the end of the day, once you go through that, if it's still not working, then you probably need to, quote, write them up.
Yeah.
And putting stuff, like formally putting stuff in writing saying this isn't working. A lot of companies have what they call a PIP, a performance improvement plan, but there's a notice. You're failing to achieve your objectives. This is detrimental to your ability to maintain your job. And then come up with an action plan, like I explained with the guy that we had the meeting to outline the goals of what he needed to achieve. So when we get people to this, if someone's going to get fired, I often will ask to see the document. And normally they're so damn vague, like the example I shared with you. It's like, no. It needs to work on improve your behavior. Well, that's not a SMART goal. That's that's a mile wide.
Well, there needs to be a line in the sand, like a number. Yes. 99 is red, 100 is green. Like a really distinct, delineated difference between success and failure. And to your point before, when we do performance reviews, we advocate that people have the manager rate a person's performance on a KPI or priority or whatever it is, red, amber, green, but then separately the individual rate their performance, red, amber, green, because then you're talking about the delta. Well, why did you rate yourself green there when I rated you red, do you think, Kev?
Yeah, we do the same when we do 360s. We get their perception. And that's why when we have executive reporting sessions and strat sessions, we get them to self-report how they think they did. I'll often ask, how would you rate your performance on a scale of 0 to 10 this quarter, to everyone individually? And then what are you going to do to take it up a notch?
Yeah.
And then if the CEO disagrees, they can jump in. So point of it is you need to, at some point, you need to start taking formal action. Strongly recommend involving HR when you do that, so they help you to do it right. They don't do it for you. And sometimes you invite HR to the meeting, which increases the seriousness of it. Or maybe you invite the CEO to the meeting if appropriate. And then finally, it's like, okay, how do you help them? Like if you've identified a gap and something, and they're willing and you're willing to invest in them, Well, what are the resources? Don't just tell them to work harder. What is the course? Who is going to mentor them? How are you going to teach them better? Who are they going to learn from? Are you going to get them a coach? It's important stuff. Again, none of this stuff is rocket science. It's really to kind of summarize all the stuff. If you've got an executive who's underperforming, you need to be able to ensure that they're having clear expectations to perform to, and that they understand, and they're clear, smart, tangible expectations. Then you need to have a conversation with them. Say, hey, there's a gap between what you're doing and what we're expecting. And then somehow you need to follow up on it to ideally see improvement or see it fade. And if it doesn't improve, you need to do something different. Maybe you change their job. Maybe you split their job. Or maybe you ask them to exit.
The point there was that they take the responsibility. You outline the expectations, they take the responsibility, and then it's on them whether they step up or step out. And you've got to be okay, because that's what the company needs.
Yes. And if it doesn't work out, it's a base, at the end of the day, it's like, if it's not working, it's almost like they fire themselves. And that they are the ones who have chosen not to do it. And worst case scenario, by the way, if it isn't gonna work, how do you allow them to exit gracefully? How do you allow them and give them time to find another job, ideally, or to take a sabbatical? But you also don't got to be a jerk about it. Now, if they're stealing from you or abusing your employees or customers, sure, walk them out in handcuffs if needed, if that's appropriate. But otherwise, look at you. You're guilty in this too. You might have been the person that hired them, or didn't mentor them enough, or maybe you promoted them when you shouldn't have. Everyone's got a role in this. How do you treat them respectfully and with as much dignity as you can, if at all possible, if it comes down to the least desirable outcome?
Awesome. What a good episode we've had here. Again, how to deal with an executive that is underperforming. And ultimately, it comes down to you've got to be able to outline the expectations, make it clear to them, and make the consequence clear to them, as we've said. So you can find this podcast on YouTube. Search for the Growth Whisperers. Obviously, you can find it also where, as you probably have, where all good podcasts are found. You can find Kevin, his firm, Lawrence & Co., at lawrenceandco.com. You can find myself at evolutionpartners.com.au. And both of us have, I'd say, pretty interesting newsletters that we put out every week.
We like to think so.
So I hope that you've enjoyed the episode, and we look forward to chatting to you again next week. Do have yourselves a good week.
Have a good one.